we're going to move quickly into our next session, Fixing the Pipeline Problem. Shelley Zalis, you need very little introduction. Shelley is the CEO and founder of the FQ, the Female Quotient, and I'm thrilled that she'll be moderating this session on fixing the pipeline problem with an amazing group of guests. Desiree, founder of ColorVizion, JT Saunders, who's recently been promoted to Chief Diversity Officer at Korn, Ferry, and Carmen, Bryant, Director of Marketing at Indeed. Shelley, I'll turn it over to you. It's great to see you.
So happy to always see you. And that previous conversation was a goosebump conversation. I mean, I still want to know what the story of the piñata is. So I think we do need to share in the chat for all of us with inquiring minds. And the Indeed video said it all, was so powerful and such a great lead in. So Julia, thank you for all that you do at Worth for hosting these conversations and most importantly, holding us all accountable for action. So sending you so much love.
Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, so this is a great conversation to have because we talk about the gaps, the gender gaps, the parity gaps, we talk about the policy gaps, and what we talk about is the pipeline gaps. And, you know, here we say the pipeline problem, we have a leaky pipeline. So let's just, you know, talk about that. And today I'd love to talk about why we have the pipeline problem, but more importantly, what we're going to do to fix the leaky pipes, because we know what water does when it drip, 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 drip. That is chaos. We need to get a little more proactive with next step solutions. So with that, I would love to introduce or have you each introduce yourselves. If you could tell me who you are, what you do, and because we're going to talk about recruiting, hiring, and some tactics, I'd love for you to tell me something that we might not know about you in your LinkedIn profile. Let's start with something a little weird. So for everyone tuning in, I am going off script. So I'm pausing for a minute to give you guys a moment to think because I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I know you can handle it. So Desiree, I am seeing you there with a big smile. So let's go with you first.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Desiree Booker. I am the founder and CEO of ColorVizion Lab, where we focus on empowering professionals of color with an emphasis on Black professionals to be successful in the workplace through career coaching. And we also consult companies to help them effectively attract and recruit diverse talent. And a lot of that work has to do with inclusive employer branding, diversity program development, and all things top of the hiring funnel. And I'm based in Atlanta. I think that one thing you would never know about me is that I served in the National Guard for 2 years when I was in college.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to JT.
Well, thank you, Shelley. And well, first off, Desiree, thank you for your service to our country. My name is JT Saunders, everyone. I currently serve as Korn Ferry's Chief Diversity Officer. But prior to this role, I worked very closely with our clients in our diversity, equity, inclusion practice, helping our clients to focus on building their strategy, doing some executive coaching, and also serving as one of the authors of our Black Female Leader study that we published a year ago to really help us think about how we advance the pipeline of Black female leaders and ultimately CEOs within our space. Something that you probably wouldn't know about me based on my LinkedIn profile is I'm a proud father of 2 beautiful girls who will likely grow up to be women of the future who will hopefully change the world. And so I'm really excited to be here with you all today.
How old are they, JT?
So you wouldn't believe it, but I have a student on her way who's going to be 17 this year and a 10-year-old. So
wow.
we're pray for us.
Well, I hope they're watching you with pride. So that's phenomenal.
I'm hoping
Carmen.
not, Shelley. They should be in class, but.
Oh, I think they should be watching you. Sorry, teachers. This is better. This is better lessons learned with this live experience than sometimes in a textbook. Carmen.
Hi, everyone. I'm very, very excited to be here. My name is Carmen Bryant, and I'm the head of US marketing at Indeed. Hopefully you've enjoyed the commercial. Hopefully you've seen it many, many times by now. A quick shout out to Indeed. We are the #1 job site in the world. We have more than 250,000 people that come and search for jobs on our site every month. But we also believe that we have a responsibility to help all people get jobs, because we know that, while talent is, evenly distributed, opportunity isn't. And so that is really a value. and something that we are very serious about at Indeed. Something that you wouldn't know about me, looking at my LinkedIn profile, I actually grew up in rural Mississippi, and I went to college at Harvard. So I feel like I'm very adept at adjusting to change.
Oh, that's fantastic. So let's get into this pipeline problem. And if we could first level set, why do we have a pipeline problem? Let's just start with the big picture before we get into the solutions for change. And just to set the context, we started about 50-50 in most industries, entry level. We end at less than 17% in the C-suite. We fall off, most importantly, in middle management. I call it the messy middle. So why do we have a pipeline problem today? And I think we need to talk about pre-COVID and then adjust around, the pipeline has disproportionately impacted women and women of color in greater ways. So let's start with what's the problem. So JT, I see you nodding, and you go first.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. I actually have a perspective on this. I don't think we have a pipeline problem. I think we really need to help organizations understand that there's a lot of talent out there. And there are people with a great deal of capability. And we have to challenge organizations, more specifically corporations, to really challenge who they believe has potential and who does not, and how they think about developing and cultivating talent for the future. I think we oftentimes focus on culture fit, or our clients, as an example, focus on culture fit. And I think part of our role here as a community is helping organizations to maybe demystify some of that culture fit norm that tends to create in organizations, where we then filter out people. So that's just my personal perspective.
So you're saying culture fit makes it one size fits all versus allowing the people inside of an organization to create the culture versus fitting in to a culture. So we eliminate sameness and we allow diversity to emerge. Very interesting. Okay, Carmen.
Yeah, I was actually going to refer to culture as well. I mean, I think one of the things when I talk to customers I hear is that they are focusing on numbers, but they're not focusing on culture. They're not focusing on, I think Ronan earlier said, are we creating the conditions with which people can thrive? You can spend millions of dollars on getting people into your workforce or your workplace, but if you haven't created an inclusive culture, why would they stay? And so often, I think from my perspective, when people are talking about pipeline, what they're saying is, why can't we retain this talent? Why can't we get people to stay? And I think it's because we've maybe veered too far to one side. You've got to have an inclusive culture before you can actually get the numbers.
And Desiree, do you have a thought on that?
Yes, I think that there's an opportunity for companies to get more creative about where they look for talent and how they nurture that talent, and really ingrain their employer brands into the lives and communities of where the talent is hanging out. So, just kind of throwing your job postings up on just a job board without having any type of diversity recruitment campaigns or initiatives to really create or remove barriers to entry into certain industries, educating talent on opportunities in your industry or field, especially if those opportunities aren't as accessible to people of color, and really kind of getting into the weeds. Like I always challenge companies to look at opportunities to build long-term relationships with talent, because if you don't have a strong employer brand in the marketplace that is already very saturated and competitive, what's going to make that candidate say yes to you over your competitors? And I think that that's where we really need to look at with regard to attracting the talent.
Okay, so let's go to attracting the talent. Then we'll move to retaining the talent, but attracting the talent. Number one, I want to start with job descriptions. Do you think that our job descriptions today are reflective of what they should be to attract the best talent? A lot of conversation is around rewriting job descriptions to be more descriptive of not what you do, but who you are. So what are your thoughts around that?
I mean, I'm not chomping at the bit. Job descriptions in general are just terrible. I mean, I think unilaterally, regardless of whether or not you're trying to get diverse talent, I think just for any kind of talent, they are very, there's so much time, I think, that we even talk about job descriptions through all levels of the organization because they're just not a very good, they're not being leveraged. They were really legal documents that have now, transitioned to being served as marketing documents. And it's really, inbound marketing, right? You're trying to attract people, you're trying to sell your brand, you're trying to sell your story, and you want to make sure that the same way that you would market a product, right? You might have sort of a general marketing message, but then depending on nuances or things that you're trying to solve for, you're going to adapt that message. It's the same thing with the job description. I think if people thought of it more as a marketing asset, they would hopefully be better.
What would you say brand you is? How would you market you? If you were putting your resume together today and you wanted to stand out with people knowing who you are, what strength would you play to?
That's a very interesting question, one I haven't thought about at all. I mean, I think for resumes, one, we've done a lot of research with job seekers, and we know that one of the biggest pain points is that they don't feel like they can adequately present who they really are. They feel like a cog in a wheel. They don't really have a good opportunity to showcase their real talents. And I'm a big proponent of really leaning into what makes you unique, as opposed to trying to solve for the things that you feel like you're deficient in. And so in a marketing role, I think for me, a lot of that is about team building and leadership and evangelizing, and just making sure people know who they're getting, because it is a relationship. And you want to make sure that, in that dating phase, you're starting to build those connections. And at the end, if you decide to get engaged or get married or however you want to look at it, that you feel like it's the right match, it's the perfect match.
That's fantastic. Go ahead, JT.
Well, I just wanted to build off a point that both Carmen and Desiree were making. I think, one, we have to think about job descriptions in ways that help to promote our employee value proposition, right? And so how do we help to build a ecosystem or an environment where we naturally attract diverse talent who sees themselves in the halls and the leadership of organizations? That's a telltale sign of whether you're going to be able to attract talent that is high performing and can give you the best possible return on your investment in them. So I think we need to address that as an organization. And I think, Carmen, to your point, we have to make sure that job descriptions don't serve as barriers to inclusion and or headwinds for talent. I think naturally what happens with people of color and women, what research tells us is that when we read job descriptions, sometimes we feel like we have to check all of the boxes, where some of our counterparts don't necessarily have that same viewpoint. And so how do we begin to process that information in ways that help us to understand you don't need to be 100%? And what can organizations do to send that signal to people who care to apply to the organization that we want difference, that we care about equity. And because we care about equity, we think differently about who fits in here and who does not. So I think there's a big portion of the conversation. We really do need to lean into some of these topics to really help us maximize the true potential of who we can recruit to our organizations. It's something we're thinking about. We spend a lot of time looking at our job descriptions to say, how inclusive is the language that we use? What are some of the ways in which we can extend the arms and legs of our work beyond, or recruiting process, beyond just the job description? To your point, Carmen, it is just a marketing document. We want to make sure that people see their lives here, they can grow here, there's potential here. And so what are some of the messages that we are sending outside of just the limitations of the recruitment process to drive results?
I think that JT, you made such a great point and literally took the thoughts out of my mind. And the only thing that I would add is really emphasizing the length of some of these job descriptions and the inconsistency with formatting, just creating your job description so that it's an easy and enjoyable read, because most people are only going to take a couple of seconds to read through it, just like a recruiter is going to scan a resume for a couple of seconds, determine if it's a fit, and then move on. And there's research to support that The sweet spot for job descriptions is about 800 words or less. After that point, it's way too long. And so I would challenge hiring managers to think about, especially in the qualification section of the job description, what are the must-haves and what are the nice-to-haves? What are the things that you're willing to train on, and what are the things that person needs to come to the table with? And so they're not realizing that all these things are affecting the amount of applicants that they're getting into the top of the funnel, which is ultimately affecting the rest of the hiring pipeline. So I'm glad you brought up that point, because that is a huge barrier for women and people of color when applying to roles.
And efficiency isn't always efficient.
100%. And also, you know, what you're all talking about is really celebrating your differences as your greatest strength to stand out. And, you know, it's a Twitter length profile, or, you know, what's your profile for LinkedIn versus Twitter versus now Clubhouse? You know, how do you brand you to stand out with your uniqueness and celebrate it, instead of trying to throw everything but the kitchen sink into this description? And, you know, one of the things I was thinking about with job description, I mean, what would you want to apply for? We are looking for an aggressive, assertive, decisive, linear, analytic, you know, leader. Or we are looking for a collaborative, emotive, passionate, visionary, contextualized storyteller leader. Like, hello, this is where we start, you know, bringing the best to the top, and not just the generic and, you know, the same old stuff and the status quo. But there's a lot of bias barriers too in resumes. And one of the things that I read about was, you know, if you put PTA or mother or, you know, something on a resume, you get dinged. Of course, when men put parent or father, they're like, oh, that's so nice. But when women put it on, oh, they're going to be distracted and, you know, taking care of their kids with runny noses all the time. What are the watch outs, the bias barriers that also hold us back from even getting in the front door, unfortunately?
I would say one is definitely the school that you went to, and that's something that you can't necessarily help. I think that this is relevant for HBCUs specifically. I work in that space quite a bit. I think there are a lot of preconceived notions about the caliber of talent that comes out of those types of schools and Hispanic serving institutions as well. And now that there's like a very huge spotlight or lens on HBCUs, people are only looking at the top tier schools and are completely ignoring the students who are coming from the more kind of like tier 2, tier 3 schools that might be the diamonds on their campuses that are perfect for grooming, perfect for cultivating. And then you have tons of employers at the Spelmans, the Morehouses, the Howards who are competing against each other, and they're not getting anywhere. So I think that some people are even nervous to put down their professional affiliations and things like that let you know that they're a Black or brown person out of fear of being kind of passed to the side.
Can I just build on what you said, Shelley? Because I think there is an opportunity here for us to give very practical wisdom to people in terms of how they want to perceive themselves in the market and brand you, so to speak. But I think we also need to make it really clear, right? I think when we say we want to create environments where people can show up at work and be their authentic selves, we have to mean it. You know, if you're a mom, you should be a mom. You know, because to me, when I think about my mother, I think of my mother was a businesswoman who managed not only a household, but a job. She was great at influencing people and outcomes. She was very effective and efficient with her time. She was able to do a lot with very little. And so I think, you know, we have to challenge the people who are in hiring decisions to broaden their understanding of what biases they have and how those assumptions drive results for the organization, and more importantly, don't drive results. And so I think as individuals, if you would ask me, what should I focus on in my resume? I think about who are you as a person and what outcomes are you hoping to achieve? That's what your resume should read. But what I would say to the recruiters, the hiring managers, the organizations, the people who are committing to a focus on talent and their cultures is, are you challenging your notion of culture fit? Are you really focused on developing cultures where people of difference can be successful? And are you comfortable with addressing the headwinds that some of us face that you may not be familiar with, but might be a barrier to inclusion for some, the people who might very well have the innovation you're seeking to drive the bottom line?
I'm so happy you brought that up, and I was challenging the status quo because it really disturbs me when I read articles that say, oh, I'm Shelley, I should call myself Sheldon so that I can get, you know, the job. And I'm like, why? I don't want to be Sheldon. I'm Shelley, and I don't want to show up and say, surprise, look what you got, right? I want to be able to say, I'm a mother of 3, I am a caregiver, and as a result, I am a nurturing leader that gives back with generosity and helps everyone rise to the top. Like, that's where we need to get to. I know, Carmen, you had a thought on that.
Yeah, I think this is really building on what everyone has said. The reality is that so many things, right, can be used against you if you're a person of color or a woman. Name, address, the school you went to, where you've worked, who referred you, how you got referred. All of those things can become challenges, which, to JT's point, I think is really important that we really sort of challenge companies and organizations to think about how they are solving for this, because it's really in their own best interest. It's really in their own best interest. And, for example, with Gen Z, which they're going to be 61 million strong, they are more likely to think of themselves as gender fluid. I mean, that's just, a small kind of, insight, but could potentially have significant implications for people that are trying to hire in years to come. So you really have to think about, is this a business priority? Is this a value? Are you holding people accountable? Do you have leadership buy-in? What are the different ways that you are thinking about this as an organization to make sure that you are getting the best talent? Because that's really what you want to do. It's about trying to get the best talent.
And to keep them. It's to get them and to keep them.
So let's get to the get them, and let's get to the retention piece now. And I just want to bring up one of the biggest things I learned recently is we've been doing a better job of filling the pipeline. You all mentioned that. But so from a recruiting perspective, but then from the hiring perspective, if we don't have diversity in the hiring team, it doesn't matter how fat and happy your pipeline is, you're still going to have a leaky pipeline in the hiring. So we talked about creating a culture of care, a culture of belonging. When you are recruiting, what is a good question to ask? Like, how do you assess cultural relevance, or that someone is a person you want to hire for your company? I'm not going to use cultural fit because JT, you just gave me the watch out for that. What's a great question? How do you get to that? How do you assess that?
I think it really depends on the organization and what the values of the organization are. And that's really how you want to assess, that talent. So if you are, one of our 5 values is inclusion. One of our 5 values is about being data driven. I think those are the kinds of, guardrails you want to think about as you're thinking about the type of talent that you want to bring in, and then ask for their experience. Have they ever, what is their experience leading diverse teams, if that's going to be something that they're doing, or building teams, or retaining talent. I think that whole perspective is really important.
I would simply say replace gut fit with factual data. Right. So it's this idea of, are there core competencies? I think, Desiree, you talked about this. Are there core competencies that we're seeking in this role that are must-haves for us? Right. So it's not so much about where you went to school or necessarily how many years of experience you have, or how many trips around the road you've taken, but rather competencies. What skills and capabilities do you bring to the table that are critical for you to have in this role? And then I think it's a matter of being able to think very, and then trying to take a non-biased approach by looking exclusively at those factors before we get to, this person's an extrovert and I like extroverts, I connect with you, I enjoy you. We tend to make decisions based on visual representation and frankly, what we call comfort, familiarity, and trust. If I can develop that with you in the first 5 minutes, I'm feeling really good about this interview. Doesn't necessarily mean you're the best person for the job. So we have to take out some of the biases and personal preferences and traditional approaches we've taken in hiring and replace them with a more of a competency-based factual approach. And so we can ensure we put the right person in the right role.
Desiree, do you want to add to that?
Honestly, think that Carmen and JT covered it. I think that one thing that JT mentioned that was really important is kind of removing that bias from the interview process. And it even kind of takes me back to some clients that I've worked with who did not really have a structured, standardized interview process, where hiring managers were ill-equipped when they showed up to interviews. They were asking the candidate the same questions over and over again from different people. Sometimes the questions varied from candidate to candidate, which does not create for an equitable interview process. And so there's tons of opportunity for bias when it comes down to that. And so, I mean, I really challenge HR to become more involved with helping to craft those interview questions and evaluation criteria to make sure it's more standardized so that the process is more equitable.
And so before we move to retention of our greatest talent, Kathy sent in a message, and she says, I have a friend that changed her LinkedIn profile and her resume name from her first name, which is ethnic, to her more white middle name, and saw a substantial increase in interest. So unfortunately, that is truism, and we need to fix this. So let's get to solutions for, we've talked about some great ways of attracting great talent. What about retaining our best talent? Because I know we lose a lot of our best talent to caregiving, and caregivers are actually have the qualities of our greatest leaders today. So it really is an oxymoron. How do we retain our best talent? Solutions in the last few minutes. Carmen, give us solutions for retention.
And I'm going to be really repetitive and just still what JT said. I think you have to look at the data. I think you have to understand who's coming in, who's staying, who's leaving and why, who's being promoted. Because until you understand what's broken in your organization, you're not going to be able to think about, what you need to do to fix it. So I think looking at the data is a big part of it. And I would just, I'm also just going to—
Carmen, before you move forward, I want to ask you about what's broken. What are you finding in general in corporations today is broken?
It's interesting. This last year has been really sort of a challenging one. And I think one of the things that has been obvious is that organizations are not listening to their employees in the way that they should be. There is a wealth of information and knowledge if they would just sort of ask the people who are in their company. It doesn't mean that they should solve for it, but that they can give you that guidance in terms of what the real problems are, and you have to be receptive to that. So for me, that's the first thing.
Great. And I didn't want to stop you finishing the second point you wanted to make.
Very brief. When Desiree was talking about bias, the one thing that I also did want to just acknowledge is, because obviously we are a very large scaled organization, we care about technology, but those biases build their way into your systems. So it is also very easy, if you don't disrupt your system, to amplify those biases. If you've always been recruiting people from the same universities, then who are the people that are going to be served up as the most successful? People from those universities.
Erica agrees with you. Erica Newman says the challenge she's seen is that in corporate America, those who are recruiting from within the company are recruiting those who are like them. They recruit from schools where they went and don't diversify where they are recruiting from every year. How do you get companies to make the change? JT, where do you go with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to build on what Carmen is saying, I think what we have to do is we have to have organizations focus more on development and not just on recruiting. My grandmother always taught me, don't tell me what you believe, show me. And so I think when we think about this work, we really have to think about it in terms of where are we spending our time and energy? Is it just about recruiting diverse talent to the organization? Is that the only place that our strategy is focused on diverse, equity, inclusion? In order to get over this hump, to your point, Shelley, whether it's recruiting people in and or keeping them, we have to focus on developing talent. That's how you keep people engaged. You make sure that you show them how they can ascend in the organization, how they see it, how they see fit, and you give them opportunities to stretch themselves and grow in ways that they couldn't imagine, and you re-recruit them. That's how you keep your people.
So not just the pipeline, but the pathway to leadership and giving them the skills they need. Desiree.
Man, we're just all on the same kind of thought process here, but Really, that's what I was going to say. When it comes to retention, creating that clear pathway of what the next step is going to be is very pivotal, especially for people coming in at the entry level and mid-career level. And also stop bringing so many people of color and women in at entry level and making it hard for them to move past that level. And also giving them the tools and leadership development things that they need to really thrive. And, you know, really just keep rebuilding the trust, right? I think a lot of companies have lost their employees' trust, and it's been all, you know, constantly all this talk, and we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and 2 years later, nothing has happened. So, you know, just make good on your word, and regain that trust and re-engage your employees, and I think that'll help out as well.
So just as a wrap up, because we've got a wrap, as chief troublemaker, I am very well known for breaking the rules and creating new ones, getting rid of the junk in the trunk to make room for new stuff. What do we need to get rid of so that we could really evolve with progress? Really fast, Carmen, give me a next steps solution.
Something to get rid of, revisit referral programs.
Great. JT?
Challenge how you think about talent.
Desiree?
Oh my goodness. I would say rethink your campus recruitment strategy from a diversity perspective and how you target HBCUs.
Well, there you go. So if we want to truly attract and retain the best talent, we need to have an open mind. We need to have intentionality. We have to look where we haven't looked before and not be afraid to try new things. So thank you so much for joining. This was incredible, very inspiring, and I learned so much. So thank you so much.